I never thought I'd be standing in the middle of the busiest shopping mall in my city, heart pounding, hands trembling, and cheeks burning like fire. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, or at least that's what my mind told me, but I knew the truth. I had stepped way out of my comfort zone. I had promised myself I'd do it once, just once, and now here I was, wearing clothes that I had only ever dreamed of wearing, looking in a mirror and barely recognizing the person staring back. The soft fabric of the pastel dress hugged me differently than anything I had worn before. The skirt flared slightly as I moved, and the delicate blouse with lace at the collar made me feel alive in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in my chest, reminding myself that this was my choice, my experiment, my secret moment of freedom. But every step I took toward the glass doors felt heavier, as though the world outside was a judgmental jury waiting to pass sentence. I adjusted the strap of my little crossbody bag and smoothed the dress, silently telling myself that if I made it through the entrance, I could handle anything. The automatic doors swished open, and suddenly the mall swallowed me. People moved in all directions, the sound of chatter, children laughing, and distant elevator music blending into a strange kind of white noise that made me hyper-aware of my every movement. I froze for a second, scanning the crowd. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, everyone a potential observer, everyone a potential critic. I told myself, just walk, just blend in, act natural. The first person who looked at me didn't seem to register much, just a brief glance before continuing with their shopping bags. That gave me a small boost of courage. I took a step forward and another, feeling the subtle sway of the dress with each motion, feeling my body shift, subtly but noticeably, into something I had been hiding all my life. I'd always known this part of me existed, tucked away behind layers of fear and self-consciousness, but seeing it reflected in the shiny floor tiles, in the mirrored store windows, made it tangible, real. Then it happened. I walked past a group of teenagers, and I could feel their eyes lock on me, not in passing but with a kind of curiosity that made my chest tighten. One of them nudged another, and I caught a snatch of laughter. Was it mocking or simply surprised? I couldn't tell. Panic bubbled up, but alongside it came a strange, intoxicating thrill. This is what it feels like to exist openly, even if for just a moment, I thought, trying to hold my head high. I made my way to the clothing section of a high-end store, thinking if I could just lose myself among the racks, maybe I could calm down. I ran my fingers along soft fabrics, pretending to browse while secretly counting the number of people glancing my way. Some stared outright, some tried to pretend they weren't looking. And that's when I noticed the mall security guard nearby, leaning casually against a column, eyes subtly tracking me. My heart leapt into my throat. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but the fear of being judged, or worse, was almost suffocating. I forced myself to breathe deeply, feeling the cotton of the dress against my skin, grounding myself in the reality that this moment was mine. Then came the whispers. Not loud enough for me to hear clearly, but close enough to know people were talking. Is that? Wow, look at them. I've never seen anyone like that. My palms sweated, my legs shook, and for a fleeting moment I wanted to vanish into the nearest changing room. But then, something shifted. A woman passing by smiled at me. Just a small, polite smile. Nothing dramatic. But it felt like a lifeline. Someone saw me and accepted me in that instant. And that tiny spark of human connection, no matter how small, ignited a courage I hadn't known I possessed. I walked out of the clothing section and decided to venture further into the mall. Each step was a battle between fear and exhilaration. I could feel every stare, every flicker of attention, and it was overwhelming. But I also felt powerful, alive, present in a way that hiding had never allowed. People's reactions became part of the experience, some curious, some disapproving, some simply indifferent. And I realized, with a jolt, that this was freedom, not just dressing this way, but existing as myself, fully, even if only for a few hours. And then I saw them, a group of teenagers, maybe slightly older than before, now whispering more openly, pointing in my direction. I froze. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, to run back home, to bury myself in the comfort of anonymity. But something inside me, a voice I barely recognized as my own, whispered, "Stay. Own this. Show yourself." And so I did. I smiled at them, not mockingly, not arrogantly, but gently, quietly asserting my presence. And the reaction was astonishing. Their expressions shifted from shock to curiosity to something else. Perhaps respect. Perhaps awe. I couldn't be sure, but in that moment, I felt seen. Truly seen. With every step I took deeper into the mall, my heartbeat seemed to echo louder in my ears, and yet, oddly, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was like I had shed invisible chains with the very act of walking in this dress, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. People glanced, some whispered, some stared, but none stopped me. And somewhere, buried beneath the anxiety, a thrilling sense of pride began to bloom. I was doing something terrifying, yes, but I was also reclaiming a part of myself I had kept hidden for far too long. I paused at a cafe, eyeing a table near the window. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the chair out and sat down, the skirt swishing delicately around my knees. I ordered a coffee, my voice a little higher than usual, slightly unsteady. The barista gave me a polite smile, nodding, and I realized I hadn't expected that. There was no ridicule, no raised eyebrow, just a simple acknowledgement of my presence. And somehow, that normalcy felt revolutionary. I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth calm my shaking fingers, listening to the murmur of conversations around me, feeling both a part of the world and distinct from it at the same time. Then I noticed the reflections in the glass windows opposite me. Every mirror-like surface in the mall seemed to hold another version of myself, nervous, cautious, uncertain, but also radiant, brave, alive. I stared at the reflections, tracing the contours of my face, the gentle curve of my shoulders, the way the dress seemed to flow naturally around me. I remembered all the nights I had spent hiding, pretending, blending in, denying myself simple pleasures. And now, for the first time, I was living in the open, and it was intoxicating. But the thrill was short-lived. I felt it first as a ripple, then as a wave, the unmistakable sense that the attention was intensifying. People were no longer just curious. Some were openly staring, some pointing, and a few were whispering directly to each other, glances darting in my direction. My stomach knotted, panic clawing at my chest. I could feel my composure threatening to crumble. What if I had misjudged everything? What if this was a mistake, a foolish experiment that would only leave me humiliated? I tried to focus on something else, anything else, letting my eyes wander over the sleek lines of the mall architecture, the bright signs, the colorful displays. But it was impossible to ignore the tension building around me. And then, something unexpected happened. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, walked past my table, tugging at her mother's hand. She looked up at me, eyes wide, curious, and then, with a kind of innocent certainty, she smiled and waved. I froze for a moment, then returned the smile. Her mother gave me a small, approving nod. That tiny gesture, a child's unfiltered recognition, shattered the fear that had been building inside me. I realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. I finished my coffee, the warmth and the sugar calming me more than I expected. I left the cafe and walked toward the escalators, noticing the patterns of movement around me, the flow of people, the quiet hum of mall life. And then, without warning, a man brushed past me, muttering something I couldn't quite hear, and I felt the familiar pang of anxiety resurface. My instinct was to shrink back, to make myself small, disappear, but I didn't. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and kept walking, letting the heels carry me steadily upward. At the top of the escalator, the mall opened into a large atrium with glass ceilings letting in sunlight. The space was filled with people, all moving, talking, living, and suddenly I felt a strange, surreal sense of liberation. I realized I wasn't just performing bravery. I was experiencing life in a raw, unfiltered way. Every glance, every whisper, every stare was no longer a threat. It was a confirmation that I existed, fully and unapologetically. And in that moment, I understood that my cross-dressing wasn't about defiance or shock. It was about authenticity, about embracing a truth I had denied myself for far too long. But just as I started to feel a sense of calm, I noticed a group of teenagers standing near a railing, pointing and laughing more openly than before. My stomach dropped, and a wave of dread washed over me. I wanted to run, to escape, to vanish into the crowds below. But instead, I did something I never thought I could. I walked straight toward them, each step deliberate, my eyes meeting theirs. The laughter faltered. One of them looked away, uncertain. Another whispered something I couldn't hear, but the tone had changed. There was tension now, but not mockery, an acknowledgement of my presence, my choice, my courage. For the first time that day, I realized that the world outside my comfort zone wasn't just a place of fear, it was a place of possibility. And as I stood there, surrounded by strangers, staring back at me with a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and maybe even admiration, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need to hide. I didn't need to shrink. I was here, I was me, and that was enough. After that moment by the railing, something inside me shifted. The panic that had gripped me earlier was still there, like a shadow clinging to the edges of my consciousness, but it no longer controlled me. I walked through the crowd with a steadiness I hadn't known I possessed. Every glance, every whisper, every sideways stare became a brushstroke in a larger, unexpected portrait of courage. People were noticing me, yes, but I was noticing myself more, and that was infinitely more powerful. I drifted toward a boutique I had always admired from afar but never dared to enter. The glass doors were sleek and inviting, and I hesitated just long enough to feel the thrill of possibility before pushing them open. Inside, the soft lighting and carefully arranged displays made the space feel intimate, almost protective, like a cocoon. I began to wander slowly among the racks, fingers grazing fabrics I had never allowed myself to touch in public. A shop assistant approached with a polite smile, asking if I needed help. I nodded, my voice calm, steady, an unexpected confidence settling over me. As she guided me to a display of delicate blouses, I caught my reflection in a tall mirror. For a long moment, I couldn't look away. The face staring back at me was both familiar and new, eyes wide and alert, lips slightly parted in or posture straight and unapologetic. I realized that every moment of fear, every heartbeat of doubt, had led me to this instant, a quiet, private recognition of myself, reflected in public. The realization was dizzying, almost intoxicating. I laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Just then, a couple walked by, and the woman paused to glance at me. I caught her eyes, and she smiled, a real, warm, human smile. It wasn't judgment or curiosity. It was recognition, pure and simple. That smile hit me like a wave. I had spent so long hiding, fearing the judgment of strangers, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be met with openness and acceptance. My chest swelled with a strange mix of relief and pride. Maybe, I thought, maybe the world wasn't as terrifying as I had imagined. I left the boutique, carrying a small shopping bag I didn't really need, just because I could. The act felt symbolic, a quiet declaration that I belonged in this space, that I could participate in life fully, without fear or apology. As I made my way toward the central atrium again, I noticed a little boy tugging at his father's hand, staring at me with wide, innocent eyes. His father followed my gaze, and instead of an awkward glance or an averted stare, he gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, but I felt it deep in my chest. Every small acknowledgement, every unspoken acceptance, was building into something monumental inside me. But the moment of clarity was interrupted. A group of young men approached from the opposite side, laughing loudly, their eyes scanning me with unmistakable intensity. My heart lurched. I could feel the old panic clawing back at the edges of my mind. Instinctively, I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to retreat into invisibility. But then I remembered the little girl, the barista, the woman, the father and son. I remembered every small moment that had reminded me I was allowed to exist as myself. I straightened, held my head high, and walked past them without flinching. Their laughter faltered, and I could feel their uncertainty, their hesitation. For the first time that day, I realized that courage was contagious, that it could ripple outward, affect those around me. I wandered toward a small fountain in the center of the atrium, the water glimmering in the sunlight streaming through the glass ceiling. I sat on the edge, letting the soft spray touch my fingers, listening to the gentle murmur of water and the hum of them all. And there, in that moment of stillness, I let myself truly reflect. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the trembling anticipation, it had led me here. I had faced the gaze of strangers, the potential ridicule, the unknown, and I had emerged not just intact, but transformed. I wasn't just wearing a dress, I was wearing my truth. Then, as if on cue, a group of teenagers from earlier approached the fountain, not mocking, not laughing, but curious, hesitant. One of them, a young woman, offered a shy, tentative smile. I smiled back. Another whispered something to her friend, and this time there was no pointing, no ridicule, just observation. And I realized, with a jolt, that I had shifted the dynamic. I had taken a step into vulnerability, and in doing so, I had claimed my space, my presence, my identity. The stares that had once terrified me now felt like quiet applause, acknowledgement that I had dared to exist fully, unflinchingly, openly. By the time I decided to leave the mall, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long, golden beams through the atrium. I walked toward the exit, every step deliberate, aware of the world around me but no longer defined by fear. People still looked, of course, they always would, but I no longer felt the need to disappear. Each glance, each whisper, each point of attention was now a testament not to judgment, but to my courage. And as I stepped back into the cool evening air, I felt a profound sense of freedom, the kind that comes not from hiding or conforming, but from daring to be oneself. Stepping out of the mall into the soft evening light, I felt the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. The city around me was alive, buzzing with people, cars, and streetlights flickering to life, but I felt untethered, almost floating. The dress I wore, once a source of anxiety, now felt like armor, soft, protective, yet revealing in the most honest way possible. Every glance that had once made me shrink now felt like fuel, a confirmation that I had claimed my place in the world. As I walked toward the parking lot, I couldn't help but replay the day in my mind. Every step, every look, every heartbeat had been a test, a challenge I hadn't known if I could survive. And yet here I was, not only surviving but thriving. I remembered the little gestures that had mattered most, the barista's smile, the child's wave, the quiet nods of strangers acknowledging my existence, and realized that these moments were more powerful than any judgment I had feared. They were proof that connection didn't require conformity, that acceptance could exist in the simplest acts of recognition. I found my car and paused for a moment, letting the cool air brush against my face. My reflection in the windshield caught my attention. I stared at the person looking back, a mix of vulnerability and strength, fear and bravery, hesitation and certainty. For the first time, I could see myself fully, not just the surface of a dress, not just the shape or the fabric, but the essence of who I was becoming. I realized that this day, terrifying and exhilarating, had marked the start of something profound. I wasn't simply experimenting. I was stepping into the life I had always wanted, one moment, one step at a time. Driving home, I reflected on the whispers, the stares, the curiosity, and the subtle admiration I had felt throughout them all. It hit me that the world's gaze wasn't something to escape, it was something to navigate, to challenge, to exist within. I didn't need everyone to understand me, to approve, or to accept me fully. What mattered was that I understood myself, that I claimed my identity, and that I dared to be visible. When I got home, I sat in front of the mirror for what felt like hours. The dress had been folded neatly, the heels placed to the side, but I lingered in that quiet space, absorbing the enormity of what I had experienced. I thought of the fear, the tension, the adrenaline coursing through me, and realized that those feelings were no longer chains. They were markers of courage, of transformation, of authenticity. I traced the contours of my reflection with my fingers, feeling gratitude for the small, steady steps I had taken, and for the courage that had carried me through every stare, every whisper, every heartbeat of doubt. And then it hit me, like a gentle but undeniable truth, this wasn't the end of my journey. It was the beginning. Each day, each choice, each moment of daring to exist fully in the world would continue to shape me, refine me, and reveal the person I had been too afraid to show. I realized that cross-dressing in the mall wasn't about shock or rebellion. It was about presence, visibility, courage, and self-acceptance. It was about taking the internal and letting it breathe in the open air, letting it be witnessed, and in that witnessing, finding freedom. I stood up, feeling taller, steadier, lighter. The stares, the whispers, the curiosity, I welcomed them now. Not because they defined me, but because I had chosen to define myself. I smiled at my reflection, finally, fully, without hesitation, without fear. And in that smile, I saw a person who had dared to step into the world as their authentic self, and in doing so, had discovered something profound. The power of living openly, honestly, courageously, unapologetically. And as I left my apartment and looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance, I knew this. The mall, the stairs, the whispers, the fear, they were all part of the path that had led me here. Every glance I had endured, every heartbeat of anxiety, every flicker of doubt, it had all been necessary. And now, for the first time, I felt what it truly meant to exist fully, without shame, without hesitation, without hiding. I felt free. That night, I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had crossed invisible boundaries, faced the gaze of the world, and discovered not humiliation, but empowerment. And I knew, deep down, that this day, terrifying, exhilarating, transformative, would stay with me forever. I had stepped into the world as my truest self, and everyone, somehow, had stared. Not to shame me, not to scare me, but because they had witnessed courage in its rawest, most human form. And that, I realized, was far more beautiful than I had ever imagined.